My name is Brian Tuffin with IMAGINiT. I've been working with IMAGINiT for about 10 years now. Prior to that, I come from the architectural background. BIM has been a huge passion of mine. Ever since Autodesk purchased Revit and we got to see what the capabilities of Revit were, I realized to fully implement a BIM-based solution, it's dependent upon the content we have, the content we develop. So I lucked out and got the opportunity to work with Autodesk a little bit and help develop some guidelines and set standards for how content is developed. That's what the focus today is going to be. Looking at developing your Revit content in a means to where everybody can use it. We can also take a look and limit the size factor of it and make it effective content for the design options you have. So let me switch to, close that out and take a look at here. First off, when you start developing content, we need to plan ahead of time. What are we developing? Why are we developing it? How is it going to be utilized? Is it for an architect? I notice we have quite a few architects here. Is it going to be MEP based? Are we working with electrical content, HVAC? What important information is inside of here? We might also want to take a look at what is the load. For my structural guys here, it'd be nice if I put a big train unit up on the roof, if we actually had the actual weight, wouldn't it? You're probably not going to trust that weight. You're going to design to a plus factor above that, but at least you have a guiding starting point for that. So BIM to me is not building information modeling. To me, BIM stands for building information management. We're managing information about that, or data about that product, not necessarily modeling that product. And here's just a few questions I always ask myself when I get ready to start developing content. You notice down at the bottom here, I do have a web link, seek.autodesk.com. These are the guidelines that I recommend for most people. It's a pretty dry read if you're trying to go through it step by step, but I'm going to highlight some of the key points of it, and it's going to walk you through best practices for developing content. So, in planning your family, take a look at what you're building. Right now I'm just using a light switch up here. If we're modeling a light switch or we're trying to come up with a piece of content or develop a piece of content for a dimmer switch potentially, how is that showed in plan? Anybody? Do we have a 3D model that we're developing to show it in a plan representation? No, it's just a very simple dollar sign almost look to it. So we're not modeling anything. If I'm taking a look at that piece of content in an elevation, a straight-on elevation, what are we seeing? A rectangle? Maybe a circle in the center of it or a little slider? Do I have to model anything to represent that? These are the questions you have to ask yourself. Now, in 3D, do I have any 3D modelers here in the crowd? Okay, these guys are the ones that I always struggle with. They want to model everything. In 3D model, or a 3D view, or camera view, maybe we could get away with just a picture representation of it. It's not going to be that close. Now, if you're doing a high-end rendering, ma'am, if we're doing a high-end rendering, we definitely want to get a little bit more accurate with it. But we probably wouldn't use Revit for that. We're probably going to take it out to a secondary program. So take a look at how you're wanting to represent your content and start to map it out ahead of time before you build anything. Any questions on this so far? Okay. So on top of how is it going to look in 2D versus 3D versus elevation, Autodesk Seek guidelines have really started to develop a best practices for representing your content. Right here I've got a valve situation, and then I've also got a window placed inside of here. In Revit we have detail levels. We can start to take a look at different graphic representations, not only in plan, in 3D, elevations, sections, so on and so forth. According to the Autodesk Seek guidelines, we have to develop content with a minimum of 2 graphic representations for each view. So we're not just building a 3D model and having that model show up in plan, elevation, section, ceiling plan, we're actually building multiple representations of it combined into one family. The 3D model only shows up when you're looking in a 3D view. This is also going to improve performance factors. As we're working with our model and it starts to grow, some of your projects are very large, a lot of content gets developed and placed inside. This is why we take a look at shutting off the model and plan representations. In a plan, we're just going to use line work, symbolic representations. Templates. Templates are another big component that we want to look at. We have two different categories, family categories and different types of hosting that are out there. Some of the family categories are going to be mechanical equipment, electrical equipment, generic equipment is definitely a valid solution. But how is it going to be treated? Is it ceiling-based, face-based, floor-based? What does it get attached to? Well, let's take a diffuser, for example. A very simple diffuser. Is a diffuser always placed in a ceiling? Yes or no? No, not always. Sometimes we have exposed ceilings. So the benefits of having a ceiling-hosted mechanical equipment versus a generic mechanical equipment. Do I want to model two different families, one for hosted, one for non-hosted, or am I okay with just a generic mechanical equipment? These are questions you have to ask yourself. On the far right-hand side, you'll see just a quick screen capture of the templates that are available for you in family creation. I advise people to take a close look at it and don't just jump in and start creating. If you get 50 to 60% done creating your family and you realize, oops, it's ceiling-based, I need a generic, we get to start over. There's really no copy and paste and place it into a different template. So definitely take a look at that, try to figure out what you're doing. Now don't be afraid of the generic model. Generic model is a great option. If you take a look at your mechanical equipment, I do not have a face-based piece of mechanical equipment, do I? It's not a template that's up there for me. I can use a generic model as face-based, but in the categories inside the family creator, we can adjust it to be a mechanical piece of equipment. So definitely feel free to grab that generic content and start looking at that. Pardon me. Naming standards. Everybody has their own standards when it comes to naming. And as I'm sure everyone's aware that's using Revit, your type selector of content can get quite large. So different companies have come up with different naming standards. Well, through the Seek Content Development Style Guide, we've came up with an outline for naming your content. And what you're looking at here is best practices. I'll show you where this document is and give you kind of an outline of it, but these are just some of the key points I like to point out inside of the naming. We try not to use spaces. We try not to use industry-specific terms. We want to keep it somewhat generic in the description. So it would be, in case of a window, casement, wood, manufacturer name, then a short little descriptor to it. And the format we tend to follow with that naming is going to be right here. Function type, subtype, manufacturer, descriptor 1, and descriptor 2. We're going to use dashes to separate categories and underscore to represent spaces if we have to. And we get a few examples of some naming conventions inside of here. Now, if you're building content just for your company or just for your firm, I would recommend where it says manufacturer, insert company name. That way you know it's content that you've developed for you. Yes, I know the names are getting long. You can get a very long name here. Try to keep them as short as possible, but in your type selector, it does give you a really good organizational structure to be able to find everything that you're looking for. As we take a look at naming standards, we also have type and naming standards. Try not to use height, width, depth for some of your content. Try not to use 25 ton, blah, blah. Try to actually get a little bit more specific to what it is. Try to keep it specific to what that content is being placed in. And a few more little guidelines inside of here. Materials. Materials also become pretty important. More for the manufacturers, but we want to always update our material library. We don't want to accidentally, place a generic stainless steel when it's actually something specific to that piece of content. So we're coming up with standard naming conventions for that. And just a couple examples. You will notice that they do have manufacturer code. Sometimes manufacturers will have specific codes for their finishes, especially when you're getting into more of the architectural side, the doors, windows, trim, that type of thing. We definitely can include that into the content. File size. Here's the real kicker. In my experience utilizing Revit, unfortunately, working for a reseller, I usually get phone calls when things go bad. And when I say things go bad, they go really bad. One of the first things I always check inside of a Revit project to see if there's problems, how big are your families? So by a raise of hands, how many people have actually inserted or loaded a family that's over 3 meg? Leave your hands up. 2 meg? 1 meg? Okay, so we're actually getting about a third of the people. Here's a guideline that SeaRUG has put out for recommendations for content file sizes. Anytime I see a family that is over a meg in size, it's a red flag for me. I always take a look at it and see what's going on. Is it AutoCAD data that's just been brought in? Is it exported out from SolidWorks, Inventor, numerous programs out there and just brought in? That's a red flag for me. A lot of the times I can keep my content in the 600 to 700K realm. Now, depending on how many variations you have out there, it might grow. A very complex piece of content, a window, transom, side light, left, right variation with multiple mutton patterns and multiple mutton profiles, definitely could become 1.2, 1.3 meg. But that's acceptable as long as it's clean. It's a simple piece of content. Okay, let's go ahead and go live with this and start to look at some more of the guidelines. I'll try to outline them as far as best practices for developing content as we're going through this. I'm just going to take a very simple AC unit here, and we're going to start developing it ahead of time, taking a look at what variations and what thought processes I go through as I'm creating it. Please feel free, interrupt me at any time. If you have questions, why am I doing this? What's the purpose of it? How is this helping me? If I don't have people interrupt me asking questions, I will start calling on people. Okay, so in Revit here, I'm going to go ahead and close out of that file. We'll take a look at it here in a minute, but I'm going to start a new family. And in this case, I'm going to do just a generic model for this case. Now, as soon as I start this family, I want to work in a window tile mode. A lot of the times I recommend staying in at least a front right plan isometric, having at least those views open, because we're going to want to be able to access and manipulate it and get to information as much as possible. Even though I pick generic content, I can come in and take a look at my category here, and I can assign a different category to it. Don't be afraid to use the generic. This is what I was talking about. As we're going through here, the very first thing I'll do is get rid of these levels. The levels are important, but deep inside of here, what I really want to be able to get is the reference plane. So I'm just going to kind of get them out of my way a little bit. One of the SeaRUG guidelines states that all your parameters, controlled parameters, and all of your geometry is locked to reference planes. So every face, every piece of line work, everything you create is tied to a reference plane. Your parameters are attached to reference planes. So literally, your reference planes are controlling the shape of your geometry. We take all of our geometry and line work, then lock them to the reference planes. So we're going to have to build a framework to this. Well, if we take a look at this AC unit, I need to start thinking about a 3D model view. a coarse level of representation for it. So let's just make it simple. Let's just make it a box. We don't need to show a lot of information. This is for a 16th inch scale. You're really not going to see a lot of detail to it. Generally speaking, I will take a coarse level 3D model, build it first, complete everything, and then go into a fine level of detail. So as I'm looking at this, where do I want the insertion point? Anybody? Center? Center back? Somebody throw something out here. Center, center. Center back. Okay, we'll go ahead and do center back. So as I'm looking through here, I'm going to create reference planes and center back. So I'm going to create a couple of reference planes. By default, the default reference planes that are brought in with this template are going to be defining your origin. So anytime I create a reference plane, it's best practice to name it. And if I can type today, front, right, left. And then I'll go into my front view here, and I'll take a look at creating a top reference plane for it. So now we've started to develop our framework for this. We've started the very basics. Now we need to add parameters associated to it. So right off the bat, I'm going to come in and assign a couple of simple constraints. An equal constraint here. Generally speaking, I know an equal constraint is a pretty simple parameter or pretty simple constraint to apply to an object, but best practice is going to be to assign a parameter. Once you've assigned that parameter, test it. There's nothing worse than building 10, 15 parameters in your content and going back and trying to adjust it and find out the whole thing blows up. Usually you're better off just erasing everything and starting over. So once you create a new parameter or constraint, always flex your content. Flex, flex, flex. Now, as we're working with the Seek guidelines, I use the dimension tool quite a bit just to get to my parameters. And when I come in here, it's going to ask me if I want to add a label. In this case, yes, I do want to add a label. So when I'm adding a label or a parameter, I get the option for family parameter or a shared parameter. Autodesk Seek has saved us a lot of time. They've developed a master shared parameter file for you. So we can point to that text file. In this case, I'm going to quickly grab it and then I'll open up a representation of it for you so that you can see what we're looking at. So there's the Revit master shared parameter file. From here, I have a list. What am I wanting to look at? Well, a dimensional constraint. In this case, I'm going to choose width. Okay. Dimensions, width. It's already filled it out for me. Is this going to be type-based or instance-based? Does everybody raise your hand if you understand the difference between type and instance? Okay, large majority of the people here do. Typically, your shared parameters are going to be type-based. Instance-based is going to be specific, like materials maybe associated with it. In this case, I'll do type-based, and I'll go ahead and accept it. Let me back up just a little bit and take a look at these shared parameters. So, inside of Autodesk Seek's website, or seek.autodesk.com, we have the ability to download a Revit Model Content Style Guide. This style guide is broken up into a couple of categories. General category, or the generic guide. We have a Model Content Style Guide, PDF, that you can choose from. And this is going to highlight in more depth everything that I've talked about. Different levels of representation. If we're rendering it, how do we want it to be represented? Here's your list of file sizes. We're going to talk about detail level, examples of different detail levels that we may want to include. Connectors. Connectors become very important. That's one of the benefits. As I talk to the manufacturers I work with, I encourage them for accurate connector data. Where is it? What else might be important about a piece of equipment? What about clear zone requirements? Or certain offset distances for maintenance to be able to gain access to it? Different levels of representations, naming standards, and then we get into shared parameters. Well, the Autodesk text file for a shared parameter is kind of a pain to read. Not many people can actually dissect this and understand what it looks like and what they're actually saying. To be honest, it takes me a little bit sometimes to get into it. But we do have an Excel file, master parameter list, which is going to break it down by category. And it's going to give you a list of all the shared parameters that are inside of here, inside that text file that we attached to. If your company does not have a master shared parameter file that they work with, take this one, add your information to it. It's a great starting point. A lot of the different organizations, the Kitchen Council, the Woodworking Institute, they've adopted the SEEK standard and developed upon that, added to it. So this is a good list to have handy when you're wondering what parameters are out there. So going into the content that I've developed, a couple different ways to test it. You can pick on it, just type something in, 4 feet. Okay, the reference plane's moved. I can repeat this over and over and over and start to generate content that way. So instead of spending a lot of time going through each one, I'm going to open up a file I prepared. I think it's going to be this one. We'll just take a quick look at it. Yep, nothing's developed in it yet. So you'll see I've got some quick reference planes inside of here. I've got some simple parameters that have been already placed inside of here, length, width, height. And I can start to take a look at now modeling content. So I'm going to first make sure I have my plan open, my front, and let's do right in this case. I'll go into my front view, and I'll take a look at actually extruding something. So when you're starting to extrude your content and starting to actually model something inside of here, my recommendation is always go outside. Finish it. Don't worry about it. We're going to be stacking content on top of content as we're going through this. Coarse level of detail, medium and or fine level of detail. Then we're going to be doing a plan representation of a coarse level of detail, a fine level of detail. So we're going to have a lot of stuff stacked on top of each other. Instead of using the tab key to try to figure out what's what, I actually like to, right off the bat, go in, select my content, and adjust its visibility settings. How many people here have found visibility settings in the past? Okay, surprisingly, quite a few. I usually don't find that in most groups that I talk to. Most people haven't found it. Well, the 3D model, we need to determine where is it going to be shown? How is it going to be shown? So you see I'm turning it off in all plan representations, and then in a model representation, the only place that I'm allowing it to show is going to be at a coarse level of detail. We'll test that here in a minute. Once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and lock it to some reference planes. I tend to use the align functionality instead of the dragging. When you're doing the dragging functionality, you don't always hit that reference plane. As we start stacking pieces on top of each other, we're going to actually want to pick out on the reference plane instead of another piece of geometry. So, window tile, zoom all again. Let's take a look at this in plan. elevation here. And I'm still not done. I've still got to lock this a little bit more. Align it, locking it. Now don't forget about the bottom. On the bottom aspect here, you're really just sketching on that plane. You really haven't locked anything to that plane. So always unlock it or move it to see if it is locked or not. And then go ahead and run an align with a lock to it to go ahead and help out.
Is there a way to globally unlock things in Revit, or do you have all straight highlighted that works like, rather than technically trying to clean up something?
Yeah, the question was, is there a way in Revit to globally unlock everything or to be able to show the locks, show the constraints without the hunt and peck method? Unfortunately for me, it's always been the hunt and peck method. I have not found a global way. I'm actually going to engage everyone here. Has anybody found an easier way to do that? Yes, sir. Ah, yes. The answer was if you cut it to the clipboard and then paste it back in, it's going to be unconstrained from everything. Thank you. I hadn't thought of that one. Yep. That's where you can paste it to the same place to get it actually in the same exact location. I've never tried that one, but thank you. I appreciate it, sir. That's what I like about the user groups. Everybody has opinions on it. If you don't know the answer, somebody does. So once I've developed this, I'm going to want to come in. Let's grab a 3D view here. Let's go in and let's go ahead and flex this. I'm going to go 2 by 2 by 2, apply. Oh, I've got a constraint that it did not like. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that one and see what actually broke. Now, other ways to start testing this would be grabbing one of the reference planes and just start pulling. Yeah, that works pretty good. It was my alignment constraint that broke on it. And I can fix that later. But now that I've got a coarse level of detail, I want to go through and start looking at a medium or a fine level of detail for it. Same processes. We're just going to rinse and repeat. Same thing we did previous. I've built a lot of reference planes in here ahead of time. Typically, I would not do that ahead of time. I would just build the reference planes needed for the coarse level of detail and then turn around and add additional reference planes for the fine level of detail. So once I'm happy with the coarse level, I'll come in, start a create again, and maybe go in and do a simple finish, take a look at it, adjust it, visibility settings, and I'll shut everything off except for the medium and fine. Personally, I found coarse level detail as one of them. Medium and fine, I will use the same model geometry. If I want to really define something as a fine level of detail, instead of modeling, I'll draw symbolic lines or model lines on a face. Model lines tend to work a lot better. Remember though that anytime you create a model line or draw a model line, you have to have a reference plane for that line and for each endpoint of that line. So if you're trying to show vents and something, it's going to really add a lot of reference planes inside of there. So let's go ahead and work on this and develop it just a little bit further. There's medium fine. Very simple alignment here. Same reference planes. Notice that I am going through and I'm making sure that I pick the reference plane, not the geometry. Locking it. Let's go into a front view. And in this case, I'll go ahead and pop it in here. Grab the top reference plane and lock it in also. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'll open up a project. We'll leave it as a construction. I do not recall if I did this as a floor-based or not. Does not look like it. When I go into 3D, there you go. This is the 3D view of my project. I'm getting a coarse level of detail, or a medium fine, and a coarse. Not a lot of change. I'm now going to put a little setback curve on it. To do that, I'll minimize out my project. I'll come in and do another simple little extrusion. Also adjust its visibility. And work on the alignment. Go into a front or side view. And also lock it. Lock it, save it, we're good. Loading it back into my project. When I load it back into the project, always overwrite the parameters. Because at this point, we're just really developing it as we're going along. So now I'm at a coarse level of detail, taking a look at it at a medium, and you notice we have a little bit different representation. We might also want to take a look at rounding the corners. That'd be a little bit more accurate representation. Now, if we're taking a look at putting a radius in, we have to do that inside of the sketch mode of the extrusion. Radiuses are the one thing that we don't really tie to reference planes. We actually have them inside of the sketch mode. Any questions so far? Yes.
Trying to save time, or maybe not having the model it out completely as an area. Have you made templates where you use images attached to that model as a decal that's attached to the space in different planes, the top view, side view, so that when you actually import it and you change the size, at least the image to some degree, realistically maybe stretches?
So the question is, this is a lot of work to build a family with multiple levels of detail. Have you ever built a model that's just a generic mass with images attached to the face? Most definitely. Anytime I'm in a hurry, I'm in the beginning of the project, I'll definitely do that. If it's something that I'm going to need for future projects or could potentially be reusing, I'll typically assign it out to a BIM manager or a content development team within the company, or I might even call up the manufacturer themselves. Hey, Carrier, Train, Siemens, whoever you're working with, can you provide me with this Revit content? Here's what I'm looking for. That helps quite a bit. A lot of manufacturers have started to develop this content. They just haven't got it all the way done.
Some of them, they overdo it and you end up having to run it and go back.
That they do. The statement was some manufacturers overdo it, and definitely they do. That's why we've developed the SEEK guidelines to try to help them understand. You're going to have to teach them also. Identify what level of detail you're wanting from them. So we can start to take a look at that. Inside the project, you're starting to see a little bit different representation here. We can take this to a wide level as we're working on it. I'm not going to go too crazy with this one. I will show you an example of one done, and I do want to focus a little bit of time on the SEEK website. But as I'm going through, I've got a coarse and a medium and fine level of detail for the 3D model. Plan representation. A lot of people will make mistakes when they're generating a plan representation. So when I start looking at my plan representation, I'm not really just drawing line work. So if I go into Annotate, Symbolic Lines, I do have equipment. What type of equipment? Maybe in this case, I'll do mechanical equipment. Once again, use the very simple rectangle functionality here. Select the content and adjust its visibility. Notice I do not have plan levels. Since I'm using symbolic lines, they only show up in this view. So we don't have to go through and shut those off. We can adjust the coarse, medium, and or fine. Well, what am I going to show in a coarse versus medium or fine? Well, maybe at a coarse, it'll just be the outline. Maybe at the medium and fine, I'm going to show the outline as a hidden line of the pad that it sets on. Might be important. Maybe at a fine level of detail, I turn on a dashed or phantom line that shows the maintenance requirements. How far setback does it have to be from another object to be able to get in there and provide maintenance? I was working with a company that does seed drying. They have big giant seed dryers. And with the motors for the fans, there's filters associated with them. Well, apparently nobody took into consideration that those filters had to be changed. There was no way to get to them. So they just ran the equipment until it burned up and then bought a new one. Sounds like a huge waste of money to do that, but it's happening more and more. I was working for a car manufacturer, providing BIM documentation for one of their plants. They had light fixtures that cost a few $1,000s. But inside of most manufacturing plants, you'll notice it's not just things that are happening on the floor. There's multiple levels of movements, conveyors, this and that. About 70% of their lights, once they were installed and the plant was up and functioning, they could not change the light. So once it burnt out, hey, let's just buy another one and hang it somewhere else. Doesn't make sense. So in a BIM environment, why not incorporate these clear zones, these spaces, along with it? So I'm going to show this one everywhere. And I don't think I'm going to really align everything and lock everything. I'm going to load it into the project. And you'll notice we now have our representation for it. The reason I'm not locking it or aligning it is I want to show you that I just made a huge mistake. So I'm in a floor, and with this floor, concrete metal deck. See if I can get a surface pattern here to show up. Architectural plan. There it is. Edit the type. Why would my surface pattern not show up? Because I'm in the construction. Background. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. What I did is I did line work. If I had a brick pattern, a tile pattern, or something on the floor, it's going to show through. So instead of using line work representation, be sure you use a masking region for the outside of it. That way you're blocking what's below, what's behind. A lot of times I see manufacturers, when they first start building their content, they forget about that. So I'm just going to go back in here and quickly fix this one. Go ahead and remove it. And in this case, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to go ahead and use a masking region. Notice I get the same options for my line weights to be able to place it in. I'm just using a masking region associated with it. Finish, happy with it, adjust its visibility, leaving it everywhere, and I'll go ahead and align everything. Repeat the question.
Can you set that masking region in another level besides the floor?
The question was, can I set that masking region in another level besides the floor? Yes, you can. You would have to create that level, or you would have to use a multi-level family, which is now available in 14. So we can start to control multiple levels associated with it. I'm literally not drawing that masking region on a floor. I'm drawing it on the plane. So if I created a top plane, which I do have here, I've got a top plane, I could set that plane active and start sketching on that plane. So yes, you definitely can. So I'm going to go through and hit one more here. I did lock that, looks like, to the wrong point. Yeah, I'll let it go for now. Finish it, save it. And at the higher level of detail, in this case, I might actually use a symbolic line. And in the symbolic lines, this time I'll change it to a hidden line. And for that hidden line, I'll draw it in, select all of them, go ahead and adjust their visibility, removing it from coarse, only showing up in medium and fine. Once I've taken care of that, then I can go ahead and do the alignment also. I'm going to go ahead and save this and load it back into my project. Overwriting. Coarse level of detail, and when I go into a medium and or fine, we did see that I missed that one masking region. I locked it to the wrong place. But we get the ability to start to view it, test it. You always want to go back and forth. Best practices, in my opinion, take the 3D model and work in your 3D model first. Start with the coarse level of detail. Lock it, fully constrain it, set everything up that you need. After you've done the coarse, move to the medium level of detail and or fine. I have a whiteboard in my office. A lot of the times I'll sketch it out, what I want it to look like, instead of just creating it on the fly. As you get to more complicated content, it can take a little bit of time. Keep in mind though, don't go too crazy with it. We don't need to spend 12, 14 hours on one piece of content. Let's keep it as simple as possible. Yes, sir, question? Definitely. So the question was, we've got a lot of CAD data, a lot of CAD blocks, CAD symbols that we reuse for multiple different types of content. How do we bring those into families and how do we start to utilize them? Personally, I am not a fan of having CAD data inside of my Revit files. I'm not a fan of having CAD data in part of my families. I will personally take the time and go through and import a CAD file. So I will take a brand new family, maybe it's just a detail family that I'm creating, or a repeating detail. I'll import the CAD line work and I'll maintain the colors. I won't convert it to black and white. I like to see it as colored information so I know, hey, this isn't Revit. We're going to trace it, or we're going to use the pick tool to recreate it. From there, I will remove the CAD data and save it out as a family. A lot of companies say, well, I can't use Revit until I have my entire detail library and AutoCAD recreated. I'm going to argue with you on that. Most of the time you'll find if you have a CAD, well, how many people here have a CAD library? Okay, about 3/4 of you do. Keep your hands up if you have it. Raise your hands or keep your hands up if you actually use it. We lost about half of you. Of those of you that actually use it, how many people use about 25% of it? More than 25%, 50. Okay, we're down to like 3 people with their hands raised. So you'll find with that CAD library, even though it is a great utility, it's a great resource for you, not everybody fully utilizes it. Only convert them as you need them and slowly develop your library that way.
Are there any programs out there that convert CAD so that when you bring it into Revit, there is going to be drawn from scratch, it will recognize parametrics, it will recognize maybe somehow the information so that it can be utilized to create?
Question was, is there any programs out there that can automatically convert CAD libraries, and I'm going to go one step further, I'm going to say 3D model libraries into intelligent Revit content. There's a lot of programs out there that claim they can, and now when I say they claim they can, I expect it to meet SEAT guidelines. I expect it to be fully constrained, 2 reference planes for every face, multiple levels of detail, and all parameter data to come across. No, nothing does that right now. But
Autodesk has the suites now with Inventor and all that stuff built in.
Yep.
Is there one particular product that is easy to use, model, for
Well,
manufacturing basis or family basis to create so that it's easily exported out to Revit or?
the question was, with the Autodesk suite of software, is there a way to take or one program that works better than others? Yes, most definitely. With the Autodesk suite of software packages, Inventor. Autodesk has spent quite a few years developing an interoperability between Inventor and Revit and Civil 3D, Revit, that type of functionality. Inventor has an export to BIM. Although it's not perfect, in 2014 it's a lot better than anything I've ever seen. It will bring geometry across. It uses a shrink wrap functionality to allow you to remove your nuts and bolts and holes and your very tight radiuses. It just gives you an overall mass. So we can export that data out to native Revit content, and it will generate reference planes for you. However, the parametric rules, the formulas, do not come along with that. So it's improving. I expect in the near future, future releases, it will increase in its functionality. I know it's an initiative of Autodesk, and it's something that as users we've been asking for a long time. Now, I do have another question. I'm going to finish up and go back to the CAD Data or CAD Library. When you take a look at converting your CAD library, if you have a large amount of content that needs to be migrated into or created into Revit, I'm personally a huge fan of using overseas companies. It's that type of work that can be repeated over and over. A lot of the times I'll look at a couple overseas companies that I've partnered up with to quickly turn around a few thousand pieces in a library in 4 or 5 days and have that converted as better Revit content for that. Down here in front, and I'll get to you, sir.
What about Siskiyou? Isn't Siskiyou kind of one of the solutions for at least plumbing and piping as a way to get like industry manufactured components as families and through lookup tables and everything into Revit without having to basically manufacture all these families to build your work?
The question was, what about Siskiyou? And I'm going to stop right there because I personally have not dived into that very far. So I would be speaking outside of my comfort zone for that. If you wanted to grab a business card, I can talk to you about that a little bit later. Gentleman up in the back.
So you mentioned earlier, like a maintenance clearance on mechanical unit, and that not control visibility-wise. But when you bring in the component in your product, you want to see that clearances, but you don't want it plotted or printed out. So you're using it for design purposes.
Yes.
Do you have a technique for that?
The question was regarding the clearances, clear zones, maintenance requirements. We don't want it to plot. Well, maybe I wouldn't put it in a fine level of detail as line work. Maybe I would put it in as an invisible line work. That way I can still run clash detections on it or invisible 3D geometry.
But when you have it as invisible, when you bring in the components, you don't see it, like normal.
Right, you would have to go in and adjust it and turn it on for that visibility of it. A lot of different ways as far as the clear zones. It's a newer thing. Autodesk really hasn't addressed the clear zones and maintenance zones yet in their content style guide. It's something that the manufacturers are really starting to request.
But there's no plot.
No, there's no plot right now that I've found.
You could put a visibility parameter on the family and clear them.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Inside families, the statement was an answer to that as a workaround, is visibility parameters. As I'm working inside of here, every single object, everything we create, has a visibility associated with it. So, let's get back there. A visibility. And with that visibility, I can tie it to a parameter. So what I can do is I can create an on-off parameter. Show clear zone requirements, or don't show them. Check it on or off. That's a great way to turn things on and off, just linking them. Oh, hold on just one second.
Well, if you have multiple devices and that have visibility, that you turn that on to see your setbacks or clearance zones, well, then you'll have to go back, if you want to plot out things, you'll have to go back to each individual one to turn it on.
Yes, in that case, what I do type-based. So it would turn them on for all the types instead of instance-based. But if you did have multiple equipment, yeah, you would have to go back and turn multiple pieces of equipment on and off.
If you were in a CAD-based system, you'd have a layer.
Yeah, in a CAD-based system, you would have a layer base to choose from. Inside Revit, it's more of an object-based. We would want to control that by types. In that case, you can use a subcategory to handle that, or a filter, potentially, to handle that if you wanted to. There was another person other than you, sir, just one moment, that had their hand up.
I was talking about access. During coordination and stuff, you want to show your access. In MEP, a lot of times, people going on top of your access, I'd be fine and stuff, and in reality, with electricians, they're hammering down on the access on 30 cents or 40 cents.
Yep. The question was regarding access for connections and individual disciplines connecting up to it. Definitely. Here in just a minute, yeah, I got about 15 minutes. I'm going to talk about connectors and actually placing proper connectors. There was a gentleman at the back here that had a question. Yes, sir?
One other way to handle that problem with the access area is
Oh,
just show your access.
just one second. I'll run up to you. Here's another solution for showing the access.
You can use a working view to show it as you're laying stuff out, but then just have it turned off in your plot view.
Definitely. Definitely a great solution. So there's multiple ways to go about it. When it comes to the clear zones, as I said, Seek really has not developed them 100% yet, but we are working on that process. Connectors. As you're placing connectors inside a content, we wanted to start to identify what it is. Most of the connectors we have electrical connectors, duct connectors, piping, cable tray, and conduit. Now, for my MEP guys here, I am architecture, so some of the electrical, hey, I might throw inappropriate values inside of it. But if I wanted to pull an electrical connection, I can do work plane or face. If I'm picking face, I can pick that face and it goes to the center of it. Well, that might not be the right location. Always create a little stub out or a void or a recess or a panel that it will connect to and constrain that panel connection, that panel height location for it. We do want to make sure the stub outs are in the right location for any type of piping, any type of conduit. When we're dealing with pipe, we can identify what type of system it is. We can identify flow direction. Duct work, what shape of duct, what size duct. All of this can be incorporated into the family. When I come into my connector and go ahead and select on it, we have quite a few variations in our properties to choose from. What type of power is it? Balanced, unbalanced, telephone? Is it a security, fire alarm, nurse call, controls, communications? How are we treating this? Well, let's just dive in a little bit further and take a look at power here. Let's go ahead and hit balanced. Is it leading or lagging? Let's go lagging. What's the apparent load? What's the power factor for that piece of equipment? Well, do we have to put all that in? No, but a lot of manufacturers will know that information and incorporate it for you. Now, right off to the side of each of these categories, you notice we have a little box. That box will allow us to tie that information back to a shared parameter. And according to SEEK guidelines, we want to tie all of these back to shared parameters. Now, if you're interested in SEEK guidelines, let me go ahead and see how the internet's working here. Helps if I spell it right. It's a little bit smaller on my screen. Apparently I'm not getting connection to it, or not very fast connection to it. We'll let it run here for just a minute. Up on the SEEK website, as you go to it, you can scroll down to the very bottom, and there's going to be a hyperlink to create manufacturer-specific content. When you pick the create manufacturer-specific content, it will give you a link. It will give you a link to be able to download the style guide. The style guide holds quite a bit of information in here. As I was looking through just the very simple general guideline, we do have category-specific guidelines, samples. So depending on what you're building for individual disciplines, whether it's an air handling unit or a window or a door, we've got another entire list of guidelines that we have to follow with it. IMAGINiT, as a company, we have an online user group that's free for anybody to attend. I would encourage you, definitely, along with this one, check it out. We do dive into discussion groups on this. We do have a forum to where we'll dive into questions and answers associated with that. For myself, I tend to be pretty passionate about Revit and content development. So this could be dangerous since this is getting published. I'd like to give everybody my contact information. I travel for a living, typically 3 weeks out of the month. I'm on the road, so email is the best way to get a hold of me. If you have additional questions, please feel free to email me. If I'm not able to answer it, I will definitely pass it on and try to help you get an answer. But I encourage you to feel free to contact me.
So, out of curiosity, how many of you took something away today that you can take to your office and share with others? That's of value. Okay, great. Well, we at IMAGINiT, we really would like your feedback. We're going to be hosting again in October, but again, we do many free webinars. My contact information is up there also, so if you can't get a hold of Brian, definitely reach out to me. But if you give me some feedback what you would like to see, I will set it up and get those emails out to everybody. Because if we work as a collaborative group, we could definitely make this transition for architects, engineers, and designers more transitional and easier, basically. So I don't know if you want to say anything else, but it's sad we're almost to the end of our time.
How many people
now, though?
How many people walked away with picking up something new, a different idea, a different way? Excellent. How many people did I actually force them to start asking more questions? That's important too. Hey, as long as we know what type of questions to ask. You guys are very fortunate. This is a huge user group. The typical user group that I meet with is in the 20 to 35 maximum on a great day. You've got a huge pool here to pull from, a huge knowledge base here to pull from. Leverage it, help each other out. That's what this whole thing was intended for. And I definitely want to thank everyone for allowing me to come out here and talk to you. And as I said, feel free if you have any questions.